If the remedy to that is Congress holding the executive accountable, but then Congress keeps passing new appropriations bills that fully fund the defensive and offensive operations of this quote unquote police action, then is it illegal?
Yeah, no, I don't think that appropriation is an authorization for use of military force, notwithstanding the fact that you're saying that there's implied consent because Congress isn't taking some sort of action to restrain the president. But no, I don't think it's enough to just to say, we're passing normal appropriations. Putting aside the fact that appropriations, the most recent continuing resolution or whatever budget was done before this action was taken. There's one being considered right now as relates to DHS. No, to me, the continuing appropriation is not sufficient to see like congressional acquiescence. The war was illegal when it was launched, and it doesn't become like that act by itself is already just like it was illegal as it started, and a grounds, in my opinion, for impeachment immediately.
Then I want to press you a little bit about this, and then hope that we don't get wrapped around the spoke, so to speak, on it. My frustration with your appeal to legality is, let's say that we have let's say that we have the case of O.J. Simpson, and I hope you guys are able to track my analogy. We have the case of O.J. Simpson, where I believe, as a fact of the matter, that there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt that O.J. Simpson was guilty of the crime of homicide, right? I felt like he was faking the glove incident. There was blood spatter found on some of his personal items. The knife was found in his home. He had motivation. He was stalking and harassing his wife and boyfriend. I think that this guy...
They didn't find the knife, heads up. They think it was in the back or whatever.
Let's continue assuming. For the sake of an analogy. Let's say that I believe there's overwhelming evidence that he's guilty. But then a jury of peers, whom I disagree with, I would argue with them about it for years, months, days, they find him not guilty. And I say, well, based off of the legal standards, what you guys was illegal, because there was effectively proof positive that this guy committed homicide, and you let him go. At what point does my appeal to legality matter if on principle I feel like I can line up all of these things that back up my legal argument, but the organ that processes legal adjudication either doesn't function or comes to a result that I don't like?
Yeah, so presumably you value the Constitution. I would assume this about you, even when there is no like effective remedy that can be enforced, right? Like you would want a president to be faithful to the Constitution, even when the Constitution gives him the sole discretion to determine whether he's following it, right? Like even if the Constitution gives, for example, all the authority for Trump to figure out the pardons, and it's very hard for us to think about like oversight about that. Maybe there are in some limited cases, maybe through impeachment for certain things, but maybe effectively there's no like good mechanism to remedy a violation of their oath of office. I think you would still value the Constitution and respect to it in that context. And likewise, I think even if you thought that a murder was for some reason because they dropped the ball on the evidence or a verdict that is unjustified, you would still think it was wrong, and because it was an illegal, unjustified homicide. Now, you probably also think it was wrong because the act itself is wrong, but the fact that it was illegal, I think it has some independent force for you, even if there's no way to effectively, enforce that in a given instance. And even if, I think that you would agree to that.
Sure, but then we get to, and I do. I am a proceduralist, and I think that every time we violate the procedure of our Constitution, we're inviting disaster. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I do want to let you cook, but I don't want to just say it's procedure, because this is super substantive. This is like the power to make war is like one of the most important sovereign powers that our country has, and it's being stolen by the president. I mean, this is going to give authority potentially, and there are even like whispers about like drafts and shit, right? So like this is a really, really important substantive power, and who gets allocated that power is more than just proceduralism. It's like gets to the heart of our democracy and like whether our democracy is legitimate. It's like it's almost the same thing as like the tariffs. You would never say, well, you take issue with
Emma,
Trump's tariffs because they're illegal. That's a procedure issue. It's like, no, it's like he doesn't have that power, and it's substantive that he doesn't have that power. I don't know,
in the
but I'll let you respond.
basket.
Took. Sorry for
Sorry,
interrupting.
I'm talking to my mom because I
Oh,
want a pencil sharpener.
no worries.
In the basket that's in the kitchen, there's a pencil sharpener. It looks like a little plastic. Could you just grab me the sharpener, please? Thank you. Grandma Points, Points is also hanging out. So
Wow, very
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So
Hello to
she's helping us do some spring cleaning. So the
very nice.
the all right. So hold on. No, you're right, and maybe proceduralism feels dismissive, but let me.
That's all I'm saying. I
Let
don't
me.
know that you implied that. I'm just saying I want the audience to know
No, maybe I did.
that.
Maybe I did. But I want to press back on that. So for instance, and I think I can argue. Thank you. That's perfect. I think I can argue this successfully, and maybe I don't know which direction you're going to go. Okay. So
Sure, yeah.
let's say that I appeal to historical norm where I just go through a series of conflicts that we've had in the United States stretching back 250 years in which Congress had minimal consent or no consent to armed conflict on behalf of the United States.
Right, yeah.
Then I'm going to need some kind of like consistency effectively because I'm going to be arguing that from a historical perspective, we've been paving this path to hell with good intentions for 250 years. And
Yeah, I'm gonna bite a lot of those bullets because I'm gonna say that basically you're right. Up until the Korean War, there is a precedent of Congress getting involved at least with statutory authorizations. Putting it aside, for me, the formal declaration of war itself isn't the important part. It's about the fact that Congress is passing some sort of authorization, whether
but
it's a formal
can I
declaration of
bring
war.
no sorry, finish your idea.
Yeah, just that like there's a pretty decent track record of up to the Korean War, this being what Congress did, getting minutely involved in this kind of shit. And then after that, we still have certain cases like, for example, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, where it's a I think sufficient condition for me to be in support of the action that it be legal. And I'm just going to bite the bullet that to the extent that the interventions in between done by Obama, done by Clinton, done by yes, Clinton. Yes, Bosnia. Yes, fucking uh, Libya with
Libya,
Obama.
Syria.
Yeah. So
Okay. I mean that was
Syria.
going to be my entire counter argumentation. So if you're just kind of granting it, then the only
Yeah,
reason
I'm
why
not okay with the president. Well,
I would
I
just
will
want to
say though, for
articulate
Syria,
it for the sake of the audience. That's the only thing I would want to do.
yeah, for Syria, I will say I think that there's a difference between the attacks against ISIS, which is literally an outgrowth of Al Qaeda, where I think that certain strikes and again, a lot of it is like funding rebels and who I don't think that's the same thing as making war is like funding the Kurds or whatever. I don't think that that's at issue. A lot of that is appropriations anyway. But in general, so putting aside the issue of ISIS, where I think that there arguably is a good faith under the original authorization related to 9/11 to attack ISIS. With respect to like attack, I don't know if Obama bombed the regime, the Syrian regime.
No,
Maybe he did.
the only I
I think
think
no.
there was one airstrike against an airfield in response to alleged chemical attacks or something like that, but it was very limited. And I think it took out like Russian logistics support networks. We never, at least to my knowledge, to what I don't remember, we might have covered or provided like air cover to special forces and Kurds, but that was during like active engagements with ISIS. I
Right,
can't
and Obama,
remember.
I think, went to Congress to request, like, "Hey, do you guys want to go to war with? Or do you want to authorize me to take strikes on Syria?" And they're like, "No." And that should like inform us about something that like if the Congress people, the representatives of the people, are unwilling to sign off to authorization for the use of force, and we're worried that by putting it in the hands of Congress, they're actually going to reject a lot of these wars, then that's kind of like a tacit acknowledgement that our leaders recognize that putting it to the vote of the people's houses is not going to produce the same result because the people, at least intuitively in their minds, perhaps, are less in favor of these actions. and
This
or whatever
this
the rationale
is
is. It just belies a guilty conscience almost. That I'm not sure I could
this
prove
is
that,
the
but it just that's what I feel.
argumentation that you and I are going to be lockstep in. And so this is where we're going to be in lockstep. So I can appeal to the Iranian, let's say the Iranian regime gets overthrown and it's the equivalent of South Korea and tens of millions of people are freed from an authoritarian regime and we have normalized trade relations. That's not an appeal to legality. That's like an appeal to consequence. And by the way, doesn't we know there's going to be a lot of chaos and bloodshed in the interim leading up to that result, and that result isn't even probable, it's just possible. And there's a whole bunch of other shit that's on the table that's equally possible.
Because you can look at other because you can look at other interventions, and I don't know, like,
Libya. You can look at Libya. You can look at Syria.
Libya
you can look at the entire Arab
Vietnam,
awakening in
all
the
these
Middle
others.
East and North Africa. Yeah, it could be really bad.
And I think in order to justify me saying like we're going to violate the Constitution, I have a very high burden for like a knowing violation of the Constitution. It's going to have to be like civilizational in question. And for me, like not even, and I mean this literally. Sorry, one second. Fucking hair's messed up.
I think it looks great. I think you look like a middle schooler about to go play. Throw some baseball with the friends. After school. I think that's what it looks like.
With the full beard. Okay. Someone check this.
I mean, I knew some Hispanics in middle school who had full beards. So.
True. What I was saying is like, for me to knowingly endorse a president, like violating the law, it's gonna have to be a very high threshold showing. Maybe if we're getting into like tens of millions of lives, we're approaching it. But that is the like size. It needs to be existential for this country. That's how important it is for me to like maintain this country. That might seem like an insane thing to say, but like
no, I'm with you. If we destroy the republic and turn us into a skinwalker of a republic, but we launched a war in Iran that has as many chances to fail as it does to succeed, and we're threatening like nuclear holocaust in order to do so, then yeah, clearly this is like a horrible calculation. It's incredibly stupid. Now it might work.
And I don't want to turn into China, right? Like, 'cause I don't want to be like China. I don't want to be like Hungary or Russia. And I feel like all of these instances where we're chipping away, it kind of reminds me of the conversation that Hutch has had, where it's very structural and lib pill to be like, we need these guardrails, and no, we can't just do illegal things because it'll produce a good result, whatever. And it tracks consistently with this, right? People's brains just turn off. I'm not saying you, but other people's brains turn off, because I think you are considering this stuff. When it comes to foreign policy, like they almost like don't even want to get into it, right? They almost don't even want to
flip your analytical lenses because clearly it's easier to win on one instead of the other. So if you let's say you start grilling me on legalism, that might sound dismissive, but I promise it's not. Let's say that you grill me on legality, and then I appeal to historical violations of this legality, and then I appeal to the consequentialism of freeing tens of millions of people from an authoritarian theocratic regime. Well, now you're the bad guy because you want all the Iranian people. Hold on real quick. I'll finish and then I promise I'll let you respond. But now you're the bad guy because you want tens of millions of Iranians to live in authoritarian theocracy, and you're a piece of shit. But I don't feel like that's good faith, because I'm pretty sure you want the Iranian people to be as free as possible.
100%.
You just don't think that blowing up the entirety of their oil and command and control and political infrastructure is the way to free them.
Let me give people what they want. First, I want to respond to that, though. Something really interesting you said on the kind of like historical precedent, like, well, now it's been eroded, right? I don't think that we would say this for certain things that you care about. So it was the case that for literally centuries, the second, like 200 years plus, the Second Amendment wasn't thought of and wasn't applied as an individual right. Until the 21st century, it wasn't applied against the states at all, only against the federal government. And until the 21st century, it wasn't applied as an individual right, at least not from Supreme Court precedent. But you would never say, well, oh, I guess we've always done it this way, and so we should just like not have the Second Amendment anymore, just because it's like recent that we've like discovered that maybe it has more substance to it than what people thought before. Similar to the First Amendment, right? The First Amendment, you were used to, maybe this you think this is based, you would be able to like charge participation in the American Communist Party as a crime back in like the early 20th century. And the first administration, sorry, the Adams administration, they made it a crime to like insult the president with the Sedition Act. So we've never been like fully true to some of our most base principles, to say nothing of like slavery and all that stuff. But we wouldn't just say, well, because we weren't faithful to this provision that matters, therefore in the future, we should just forget it. So I
No,
don't think
if anything, I would be arguing the opposite, is that it's clear, at least in my opinion, that we've reached a tipping point with this eroded balance of power between the executive and the legislative, that the legislative
right, yeah.
must, not should, and unfortunately, I don't know if they're going to. I don't know if they have the stones or the logistics to do it. But if we're going to preserve the republic, I think they must reassert the balance of power in reference to war making.
Right. And this is also to the Hutch argument too, which is Hutch is arguing against people who say, well, Trump already did these political prosecutions. He already did this kind of stuff. And so the gloves are off. But I don't think that we're, just because Trump has disrespected it, or indeed, in the case of you might even have a better case for the war power specifically, because it's been a bipartisan, and some of the darlings of the Democrats have been the most flagrant. In some ways, you can almost argue that the Bush administration, the second Bush administration, was more faithful to this specific principle than Obama or Clinton were, because they sought at least some aspect of congressional authorization, putting aside obviously like the consequences of what they did respectively, on which reasonable minds can disagree. I think reasonable minds can disagree. But okay, just like stepping back, I don't think that mere violation over time, and even a track record, a bipartisan track record of violation of a constitutional like theme, means that we shouldn't apply it. And then to the second point, which is about like, let me give you what you want, and then I'll let you respond. I know I've been monologuing. In my perfect world, obviously, I want the Iranian regime to fall. I view it fundamentally as illegitimate. I don't think that theocracy is good. I think that they're, like, in many ways, a fascist state. I think that they are absolutely, irrefutably funding terrorist groups. It is a national security issue with respect to America. So all of that stuff is stuff I freely grant. And I do want, and if I knew that there was a really good chance that American intervention would produce the result of a Western friendly regime, and that it was done appropriately, I might even sign on to that authorization. The problem is, experience shows that this kind of intervention, I think, doesn't have the best track record. And so from a policy perspective, I'm not convinced that it has a high odds in general. I don't think it'll have a high odds when the people who are conducting the policy don't give a shit about the Iranian people and don't have a mechanism in place to accomplish regime change or like de-Islamism, as opposed to like de-Baathification, right? Like there was actually an effort by the Bush administration to rebuild institutions, to reconstruct things, to de-Baathify, and you can take issue with all that stuff. But at least there was at least a seeming intent to do that. And so with the leaders we have who are liars, capricious, who don't give a fuck, I think it's even less likely. And we have the issue of it being illegal and done unilaterally. So all of that stuff means that I don't think that the outcome we want is likely. And even though I would want, obviously, the Iranian people to be free. Sorry.
Yeah, so maybe for the sake of contention, we should move into the legalistic insofar as justifying it in line with this history of erosion. But I think before we do that, and I think we could analyze it step by step and effectively see what we think, what facts or whatever are in contention.
Just to explain it to the audience real quick. So what Connor, I think, suggesting, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is let's assume the previous actions like Obama, et cetera, were legal, and see if we agree that this could be distinguished from them in the sense of legality, so one could take the principled position across time that what Obama and Clinton did was legal, but that this is different than that and illegal.
And
I do, and that's interesting to me.
we might disagree on the underlying facts, or that'll be where the contention is. So I think that'll be an interesting part of the conversation to have. Before we do so, though, I want to make it clear that just because effectively when I'm positioning myself to be a devil's advocate on behalf of the administration in order to make argumentation along the erosion of the balance of power, but for me, where this is snapping, where it's pretty clear that Congress needs to reassert its authority over war making, is, for instance, in the Caribbean. So declaring random civilian vessels narco terrorists and blowing them up with zero due process under the 2001-2002 AUMF, that's clearly a massive departure from the AUMF is incredibly vague, but it's still an obvious departure from the AUMF. And then, so I almost think the 2001-2002 AUMF needs to be repealed because it's so vague. Then
and administrations, both Democrat and Republican, have interpreted just wild connections between what that authorizes and what they want to do. For sure. No, and everything you just said makes total sense.
I just want to finish that concept real quick. So basically, the other part of that is trying to stretch trafficked drugs that are voluntarily consumed, like fentanyl, into a weapon of mass destruction. So you can say that Southern and Central American gangs are effectively terrorist organizations that are actively conducting terrorist attacks against the American people. Therefore, we can drone strike them anywhere that they exist, is again such a clear departure from the intent of the 2001-2002 AUMF that asserting it is almost laughable. So I think the courts and Congress need to reassert themselves over that.
Right. But the reason when you say that it doesn't cover it and that it should be reasserted, I think you would grant this. I don't know that you would not. So I'm not trying to say like you're contradicting yourself, because you might even just grant this. I think you're granting that the AUMF needs to be complied with, right? To the extent that you're not complying with the AUMF, you're doing something that you shouldn't do. In other words, you should comply with the AUMF, right?
Yes, but I think that in 2001-2002, when this was first drafted, we really didn't know what we were getting into with the war on terror. And I think that the language effectively is like, not only can we take action against Al Qaeda and its affiliates, but we could also take action against any government officials or organs that have aided Al Qaeda and its affiliates. Right. And then we're also authorized to attack. And sorry for the chat, there's some people who are confused. AUMF is authorization for use of military force. We never had a declaration of war, I don't think, against the nation state of Afghanistan or Iraq. What we did is we used an anti-terrorist AUMF in order to justify
No, there was two. No, there was
we
two.
had an AUMF for Iraq, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're absolutely right about the AUMF for the Al Qaeda stuff, that being the basis for a lot of people to go to war on things that seem like tangentially related. So that absolutely is true. But there's also a separate AUMF specifically for Iraq. You're also correct, though, that it was confusing because the administration said, like just like this administration is throwing shit out there, right? Like,
they cited an Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
They cited an Al Qaeda branch being in northern Iraq as a part of their casus belli, their case for war. But what's interesting about that is, I forgot the guy's name. He was a huge douchebag. I think it was Zawahi. I could be wrong. But that guy was a Jordanian prisoner with tattoos who was not particularly faithful to Islam. Went to Osama bin Laden and said, "Give me $1 million because America is saber rattling about Iraq." And so Osama bin Laden did not want to give him money, but because Iraq was so clearly the next point that the United States was going to do something, he gave that guy the money. He went to Iraq before the war, and then the United States used his presence as a justification for war.
But they but they passed another AUMF, and in the AUMF, Connor's correct. This is quoting from the AUMF's sort of recitals and the introduction. Whereas members of Al Qaeda an organization bearing responsibility for attacks in the United States, its citizens and interests, including the attacks that occurred on September 11th, are known to be in Iraq. So in the AUMF, they did a separate one. Because there's not a direct connection that Iraq helped plan 9/11 or was involved in the attack on 9/11. It's just the connection afterward that is being cited. The AUMF calls that out, but there's a separate resolution for Iraq. And I think that implies, Connor, the fact that you think that it should be reined in or it should be respected, that these AUMFs should be complied with and were necessary in order to make the wars legal.
Yes, but the AUMF for the 2001-2002, if you read it as liberally as possible, it effectively also authorizes the president to take immediate action against any organization that's planning like an imminent terrorist attack on the United States. I mean, if you want to read it out loud, you can read it out loud.
I'll read it. Yeah, I'll read it out loud. I know that some presidents might, in bad faith, like say that or claim that. I don't think that's a fair reading of the AUF.
If you want to read the
quote, I'm not. But I just want to be clear. I'm not denying that some people read it that way. So what Connor is suggesting, I agree that there are some people who I think are bad faith or executive maximalists will read it that way, but I don't think it's a reasonable one. So this is the quote: that the president is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, past tense, authorized, past tense, committed, past tense, aided or aided the terrorist attack that occurred, past tense, on September 11th, 2001, or harbored, past tense, such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future attacks of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. So yes, there is a appeal in the AUMF that says this is done to prevent future terrorism, but the use of force is only authorized against such nations, organizations, or persons that did the thing. In other words, I don't think it's fair to suggest that Iran is included here just because they do other terrorism, because the terrorism that's specifically the focus of the AUMF is that which occurred on September 11th. Now, for ISIS, you actually have a connection with that organization in that it's an outgrowth of Al-Qaeda. Like, I don't think that just changing your branding makes it so the AUMF is no longer in force. But like, there's a direct path with ISIS to Al-Qaeda. And there, right, you're going against an organization that was responsible in some way, right, for the attacks on September 11th in order to prevent future acts of international terrorism. That's a lot more of a clear case of use of force. At least I'll say that it's a reasonable argument than like Iran, which is an enemy to Al-Qaeda, Iran, which is not aligned with ISIS or Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, I think the what I was thinking of though with AUMF, which by the way, I still think I'm agreeing with you that it is a bad faith interpretation of the AUMF. But I did want to read this sentence because I think it's also pertinent to the way that the executive maximalists are arguing. So, and this is asserted immediately after, or immediately before, excuse me. Whereas the president has authority under the Constitution to take action to deter and prevent acts of international terrorism against the United States, now therefore be it, and then it says what you say. So the way that I'm taking this from executive maximalists is that the president does have the ability to deter or prevent, I think is what I just said, deter, prevent acts of terrorism. But then what they're doing is they're taking that single sentence and they're expanding it without limit, including saying Iran's a state sponsor of terror, and they have done terrorist attacks in the past against the United States and against other people. Therefore, we can launch an unlimited air campaign, although it's limited to 60 days, which I think even they admit. But we can unilaterally launch this military campaign because they engage in terrorism. Which, by the way, I'm not saying is a good faith interpretation. I'm just saying that's what they're arguing.
No, I hear you. No, so I just want to be clear for the people listening in the audience. That part of what he's reading, those recitals aren't operative law. They're just like almost like statements of policy or statements of like belief of the Congress that aren't actually law. And you shouldn't take. Yes, I would agree the president has authority under the Constitution to take action to deter and prevent acts of international terrorism against the United States. But that doesn't mean that he could, like, for example, the way I'm going to do this is impose tariffs that violate the law, or the way I'm going to deter is getting rid of the First Amendment, or the way I'm going to do it. Like, just because the president has authority, which he does under the Constitution, to take actions to deter or prevent acts of international terrorism, doesn't mean that he has that the actions, the subset of actions he can take, include things which the Constitution prohibits to him. Right. So I agree that the president has that authority, but it doesn't mean that he can violate the Constitution. The authority is um, limited and cabined by the Constitution itself. In other words, the Constitution is the source of that authority, and to the extent that any action he takes to deter or prevent international terrorism is in conflict with it, for example, violating rights, or let's say he's like, in order to deter terrorism, everything is under federal control. You wouldn't say, well, he has that authority because he has the authority to take action to deter and prevent acts of international terrorism, and that's not even operative parts of the law.
Yeah, it's not. It's not unlimited.
You mentioned the 60-day stuff. I think that's an allusion of the War Powers Resolution. There, I think, to your point,
real quick,
a lot of bad faith ratings. Yeah.
I need to yell at chat just for a moment.
Yeah.
So, chat. Pisco and I have a variety of things that we could do today in order to make money. And some of those are watching drama slop of random sex acts of YouTubers. Another thing is watching the 50th fight between leftists and liberals over the future of the Democratic Party. Another one is basically just watching other people's geopolitical analysis and reacting to it intermittently, or legalistic analysis. If you actually want good faith conversations between intelligent people talking about like current events or whatever, please reward it with not only your viewership, but by liking the stream, sharing it with your friends, engaging with chat, and super chats and memberships if you got them. Otherwise, what you're telling me by not donating, no offense, I've gotten a couple of donations, but if we don't make any money, then what I'm assuming is that you want drama slop. That's what you're telling me. You just want endless drama slop. Who had sex with who and why and who's upset and all that kind of crap. So, anyways, put your money where your mouth is.
I appreciate that call. Thank you, chatters, and I appreciate you viewing and supporting all that stuff. So that's the first part, which is I agree that is, and I know that Connor is not asserting that is his view. I think what people will do is they'll do that kind of analysis, be like, well, the president, you don't think the president could like prevent a terrorist attack, and you don't think the president can do stuff to prevent attacks, like, and they'll keep it in those general terms. Their answer is like, yes, they can do some stuff, but they can't do everything. And on the War Powers Resolution, this kind of 60-day window, people misread this. And even Obama, it pisses me off so much, this OLC opinion written under Obama justifying the Libyan intervention legally. They're like, the War Powers Resolution impliedly asserts that the president has authority to like actions for 60 days, which is just not true. The War Powers Resolution specifically disclaims that. It says, don't read this as authorizing any particular thing. In their policy statements, the Congress is expressing its view that the president only has authority pursuant to a statutory authorization, a declaration of war, or this ability, implied power to defend against sudden attacks, right? There's like an implied power. So
that's going to be
War Powers Resolution,
the next step, in my opinion.
Okay, let's get to that. I want to move on to the frame of reference, which I thought was super interesting, which is the historical one, in a second. But the War Powers Resolution does not support the contention that this is legal. And so I just want, for you and me, given that you want the executive power to be reined in, surely you would agree that the best faith interpretation of what the law demands is that this current action is not in compliance with the structure the framer set out, and therefore illegal.
I want to test that logically through the next steps. Now, I'll concede that I don't think it's good faith in line with the intention of the founding fathers. But I literally, because you said imminent attack multiple times, I want to test that theory with you now.
Okay. And there will be some edge cases where it'll be a hard case, and I'll say as much. But yes, go for it.
Okay. So I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I think I need to set up the groundwork on which we're operating. So regardless of Donald Trump, we do have aligned interest with Arab and Israeli allies in the region, both for security policy and for energy policy. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is a huge ally, huge energy exporter. Kuwait is a huge ally, a huge energy exporter. Iraq is not necessarily an ally, but they're friendly enough for us, and then where they kind of vacillate between the United States and Iran. Then Israel has been an ally at least since, I don't know what, the early 60s. So we have allies in the region. And Israel might have a heterodox perspective on the Iranian regime, but effectively their perspective is we cannot let them get a nuclear bomb, because at that point they can do whatever the fuck they want with impunity and can engage in endless terrorism against us while also holding the region hostage with a nuclear bomb. That is their not our policy. That's their policy. Do we agree so far?
Also the position of yeah, but I think it's also the position of the American government, as well as good sense, that this regime, which you shouldn't trust, not get access to nuclear weapons. I agree that that is a national security interest of Israel and also of the world and also of the United States.
Okay. So with that being stated, also, I think we should further assert that, oh, Jesus Christ, with the oil. Okay, sorry, now I need to thank the people who donated. Tribe with the 2, Corey Peltzman with the 2, Numinax with 10 gifted. Thank you, King. Much appreciated. All right. Thank you for putting your money where your mouth is, Numinax. I do appreciate it. Okay, so that we agree is factually true, that we have allies in the region and we do not think that them getting a nuke is in anybody's interest. So then
just want to be clear, I don't think that's like objectively true. I just think that makes sense to me.
It's like, descriptively true of the nation states in conflict. That's their perspective.
And I think it's our perspective, America's perspective, and I think that's what the perspective ought to be. So I don't view there's like an objective, real answer to what's in U.S. interest. That's itself baking in a lot of preferences.
Sure,
but I'm just I will oftentimes reject the framing of sometimes realists to assume that there's like objective answers to what's in the best interest.
There might be a mutually assured destruction version of this, where we give Saudi Arabia and Iran the bomb, and then Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran are in a 3-way nuclear standoff until the end of time, but that ushers in more stability than what we currently have.
Right, right. So all I'm saying is, yes, and I understand the example when it shows. All I'm saying is, it's the reflection of my belief that this is what American policy ought to be, which is to limit the spread of nuclear weapons, including and especially towards states like Iran. So even though you could imagine a scenario like what Connor just provided, and if you were convinced of that, your opinion would shift. That's the way of saying it's not like quote unquote objective. It's just a reflection, I think, of our perspective on what is actually in the national interest, given our views. And so that's what I mean when I say I believe it's in the national interest. And I agree that is what it should be.
I do think the Mexican standoff scenario is pretty funny. But anyways, so the next thing.
Have you seen the Key and Peele? There's a Key and Peele with an Asian guy that do a Mexican standoff, and it just keeps escalating. I'll send you the video. It's really funny.
The Key and Peele skit that I watched recently was the baby one, where he bumps into a guy on a basketball court and he's carrying a baby. So the guy's like, oh, I don't even want to fight. And so then the dude just straps baby armor to him, and then just like he has like a baby on every single arm and forearm and chest and all that stuff. And he keeps talking shit to him, trying to start a fist fight.
I think 90% of their skits are just like the same kind of like intensification loop, where they're just like they do like 3 versions.
They're fucking with each other.
Keep intensifying. No. Sorry, go ahead. So we were talking about.
So that's one of the things that has been asserted, is that the United States and its allies, including Israel, are not interested in Iran getting the bomb. The next one would be whether or not Iran is a destabilizer of the region and a state sponsor of terror. And so the obvious examples there are that they do send money and logistical support to Hamas. They do send money, logistical support and training to Hezbollah. They did back Hezbollah with logistics and training during the Syrian civil war. And then they also have backed the Houthis. And then the Houthis, regardless of whether or not you think it's based or cringe, they have done the Red Sea crisis blockade, where they've been attacking random civilian vessels that pass through, not the Strait of Hormuz, the other one, Gulf of Oman. I forget what the strait is called.
Or I don't fucking know. But yes, and also Russia. That Iran has helped Russia with its what I think it's an illegal war of aggression against Ukraine.
Yeah, they sell the Shahed drones. I've seen Shahed drones most recently deployed until this conflict. I saw them exclusively deployed in Ukraine. Exclusively.
Yeah.
So, and for those of you who don't know,
agreed on that there's like a bunch of bad actions it's doing, and it's supporting international terrorism as well as state badness.
and I do promise we are going somewhere, Chad, if you're like where this is going. I promise it's going somewhere. So, and then for those of you who don't know, just because I do think it's interesting, the Shahed glide bomb is effectively a one-way attack drone that is the size of like a Volkswagen Beetle, but it carries an explosive payload. So it's basically a delta wing aircraft that just flies into its target and then explodes. And so it's pretty cheap. I think it costs like thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. And so what the Iranians have done.
You don't want to encourage drone terrorist attacks.
I'm not. This is descriptive. I promise it's descriptive.
I was so dishonest when people took that clip and like, oh, he's
I almost defended Hassan, and maybe I should. I don't think anybody would care, but like he was clearly being descriptive.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Anyways, okay. So sponsor of terror, supporting Russia. I guess I'll cut to the chase. So then Israel tells us, which by the way, we do have leverage over Israel, but Israel tells us we are no longer interested in tolerating the Iranian regime. We no longer want to tolerate them saber rattling about developing a nuclear bomb. We're going in and we're doing a decapitation strike against the Iranian regime with or without you. Okay. So Israel is doing a decap strike with or without us. So what you said repeatedly, and I think this is where the rubber's going to meet the road, is that in the case of imminent attack, the United States can take military action. So is it not reasonable that if an ally approaches us and states, we're going to do a decapitation strike against Iran, we know that Iran is going to respond against us and attack our bases because we are a close ally of Israel. And so as a result, we say, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. We know that if this happens, we're going to get attacked. Therefore, we're going to attack as well.
No, it's not enough for me, and I'll tell you why. The first is the facts is actually reported is that they were contemplating this for months, and this has been a known thing that could happen and pop off. And so the justification for suddenness and imminence and Congress not being available just isn't here. If this were a possibility, that this set of scenarios would occur, Trump should have gone to Congress and been like, "Hey, I need to have if I need this kind of latitude, you need to give it to me or something." But here, it's not something that's like outside of our conception, and there was joint planning on this kind of stuff very closely for months, for weeks, if not months. And there's definitely time that Trump could have prior to he could have been like, "Hey, just give me some time to talk to members of Congress." And there was time, like he had the ability to do that. That's number one in terms of the actual facts. And then number two, no, I don't think that you can justify just be based on like your prediction of what's going to occur if another country attacks Iran. I don't think that that's enough. I think you need to show that an actual attack is imminent against you, and that you have intelligence to suggest that that's the case. I mean, think about how much assets we moved to the Gulf, 2 aircraft carriers, tens of thousands of troops. We have obviously all of our embassies and shit there. There was enough time for Trump to move assets out of the embassies, and we were hearing this, right? We were hearing this whole time. They're closing down the embassy, or they're moving non-needed personnel. And so, yeah, I think that manufacturing a counterattack by another nation, I'm not going to allow that to be an end run around the Constitution. I think it needs to be a real sudden attack, which is premised on actual intelligence that they're gonna do it, as opposed to just like, well, we think they will. We think they'll retaliate against us. Recall when previously Iran or Israel did this kind of unilaterally under Biden. What was the response? The response was a token gesture, almost done like in coordination with America, and it was all good, right? Like they purposely calibrated the response as against the Americans. And so I don't think there's a good basis to suggest that just based on Israel's unilateral action, if Washington takes reasonable measures, that A, they couldn't anticipate this and get congressional authorization beforehand, or to delay Israel for a certain amount of time, or B, that Iran would actually act the way that Rubio suggests they would have.
Okay.
So no,
Well,
it's not.
I'm gonna want to tease this out a little bit. So you said that part of your calculus here is that we've been considering it for months, and you cited the military buildup and deliberations and meetings with Bibi Netanyahu as evidence of that.
Yeah.
I think we've been considering this for decades, and what I mean by that is since the 1979 revolution. We've done special forces operations that failed, like trying to recover the hostages.
Carter literally tried this. No, I'm just talking about with respect to the specific
Sure,
action contemplated here.
sure.
But
I can
totally
move on.
grant
I
everything you're
just
saying.
wanted to what I wanted to articulate to chat is the fact that a decapitation, a complex multi-vehicle decapitation strike involving naval and aerial assets all striking within 20 minutes at the same time, effectively decapitating the leadership of a foreign country, of Iran.
Right. This is so important too. Yeah.
That's probably been on the books since the 80s.
Yeah. But I think they're always planning to doing this contingency stuff, whatever, right? Like, I grant that. Then the Bush administration, if you recall, David Frumm's famous line that he gave to Bush, axis of evil, they're citing Iran. I remember this Family Guy joke when they're going to 9/11. I don't know if you remember. They're like, so this is where the first guy got AIDS, ground zero. Like, no, this is where the 9/11 attacks happened. Oh, so we got to go. So Iraq did this. So Saddam. And then the final line is like, so we got to go to war with Iran. Like, yes, it's so obvious that one of the neocons' goal, or a lot of people who have this ideology, is to attack Iran. It's been contemplated for a lot of time. But you said something super critical there, which is like, look at their actual conduct. What they did was not just that they attacked missile locations, not just that they were doing this defensively to prevent imminent whatever was happening with their with the bases, right, and the attacks in the other Gulf states. They went after the regime and they co-signed the decapitation strike on the regime and then the sort of important military targets separate from the capabilities, which in some sense I think is more likely to provoke attacks on the bases, which is what we saw. So yeah, I think that is in line, and how Trump sold it wasn't just as what his initial speech wasn't just as this is defensive in nature. He sold it as a full regime change war. He called it a war. And so all of this to me indicates that this isn't just to prevent an attack on future and imminent attack. It was taken for, I'm sure that's part of the rationale that they were fearing that, but they were also part of the central rationale, which is to topple the regime. And that's, I think, what happened, and that's what was moving it. And this is just like a post hoc rationalization that isn't actually.
Well, I agree that it's probably post hoc, and we could keep going with this line of argumentation, but I think that this is probably like the inflex point, right? It's the fulcrum of the conversation, so I think we might as well stop here because anything after this point is, I'm not saying stop the conversation, I'm saying focus on this point. Because anything after this point is going to be appealing to consequentialism or speculations about what Iran is capable of in reference to their strikes against military assets or regional partners. It's all going to be speculative from here, so we might as well stick with the
we're so far, folks. Are you aware?
Point.
We're still on legality. We're still on legality, right? So,
right.
And
so hold on.
I'm hoping that
let's focus on that. So in reference to legality, what I heard you say is that the imminent attack posed by Iran against American assets and regional allies is predicated on us taking an offensive action, and therefore that is insufficient to just take immediate military action without limit. And so that's kind of what I heard, even if I didn't articulate it perfectly.
So there's two parts of it. Yeah, you're right to identify those different categories. The first is me not buying that this provocation rationale in general, which is to say, and think of it in the self-defense context. I had a chatter made an analogy for self-defense. It doesn't, again, self-defense doesn't always apply in the same way for personal self-defense as country self-defense. I understand that. This is just a way to think about it. If someone said, well, my friend was going to punch this guy, and I knew that if my friend punched him, he would react by punching me because he thinks that me and my friend work together, and I, for whatever reason, was closer to him. And so my friend punched him, and then I immediately punched him because I knew that he would have this plan, and so I worked in concert with him. I don't think we would accept that from the individual, just as a structural point. When
Okay,
this
we
kind of
we wouldn't, but hold on. Okay, we would
Yeah.
not accept it from a. I'm laughing a little bit because I do think this is funny, and actually, weirdly enough, it still maps onto the situation. We would not accept it as a moral or legal argument in the defense of the person who did a sucker punch. But can you argue that it's not effective to say, hey, my wimpy friend was sneaking up on this bully at the bar, and I knew my friend was going to sucker punch him. So the second, and I knew he was going to get his ass kicked, and I knew this guy was going to fight me. So instead of waiting for my wimpy friend to sucker punch this big guy, as soon as my friend threw a punch, I sucker punched the big guy too, and I knocked him out before the fight even started. Like, you can appeal to legality and morality. You cannot appeal to effectiveness.
Well, no, I mean, like, yeah, I grant that. I think effectiveness is with respect to an object. So I'll tell you the following. I think that the Maduro strike was very effective in that it achieved the aim of the administration. I think the real aim, which wasn't to make democracy flourish, but was to have a more compliant Venezuelan regime. And so I don't doubt that the Venezuelan abduction was like an impressive and strategically effective move according to the aims.
Yeah,
Here,
legally and ethically dubious, but effective.
Right. I would say disastrous, but yes, dubious is fine. In the case of this strike, effective with respect to some things, right? It's effective in terms of, I do think that the strikes, and again, I don't think Israel is this wimpy guy. I think Israel is a fully jacked, big actor who has shown
he's
his
still
ability to protect strength.
5'2", but he's on steroids. He's built like a pit
he's
bull
on some
brick
shit.
shithouse. Yes,
He's on some shit. But I don't doubt that the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes have been effective with respect to significantly degrading Iran's military capacity, significantly undermining the structure of the regime, now undermining like their energy.
Yeah, I just wanted to play into your analogy because because in that scenario, you're kind of appealing to a like Roadhouse Patrick Swayze style morality of you never throw the first punch, you're always super polite, but then if somebody throws a punch at you, you kick their fucking ass. Whereas people who have been in bar fights are probably like, well, I don't want to be like Patrick Swayze because Patrick Swayze in real life would get fucking stabbed to death or would have 8 guys beat the shit out of him to death. Therefore, if I need to throw a sucker punch in order to win a bar fight, I'm going to throw a sucker punch.
Yeah, like there are situations in which I can imagine. I don't say never, right? So like, let's say that I really had a good inkling that the guy who is about to be sucker punch, I just know his character, and I know that there's like an 80% chance he's going to draw a gun that he's legally allowed to have at the bar to shoot my friend or to shoot me or something. Then I might even say that it's like morally justified if I really have that specific knowledge. Again, not applying it to this situation because there are a lot of distinguishing factors to take that punch in that moment just to make sure that this person who I know their character is not going to do it. But I would never say, therefore, it's legal. I would never argue that it's in fact self-defense in that context.
Sure.
And I think that matters with respect to the legal conversation. And so again, there are differences in self-defense principles between individuals and states for sure. But that's the way I'm kind of thinking about it, is like the first set of things that I'm arguing is I don't even think from a legal perspective this is covered by the limited executive exception, in that I don't think this is like a sudden defense of self or of the nation in general. And
let's roll with that. Let's roll with that.
Can I just put out the second?
Sure.
The second is the actual evidence on the ground suggests to me that that isn't what was motivating the administration, and that there in fact was plenty of time to consult Congress. And so the facts don't meet the standard, even if I accepted the standard, in my opinion.
Let's do the Congress thing, and then let's do the let's do Congress, and then let's talk about the legal procedure or the attempts to hold the administration accountable. So the Congress. So this is what was argued to me, and I do believe it from a effectiveness standpoint, not from a legal or ethical standpoint. So to continue with the analogy, a sucker punch is only as effective as your ability to throw it without the other person being aware that you're going to do it. And so analogizing this up to the state level is if Donald Trump had said, despite our best efforts
yes,
last
I'll
year,
grant it. It undermines it. I just want to say, we'll just grant it. Yes,
it undermines the ability to do a sucker punch to go consult Congress.
Yes, it reduces Trump's field of action, reduces his ability, his flexibility in responding to very mutable situations in the optimal way. Yes, it does. It is it's removing effectiveness in exchange for accountability.
Yeah, because Khomeini could just go into a deep underground bunker. His CNC staff could go into deep underground bunkers. It would be infinitely harder to take him out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, the way to get around this is just to tell Congress, hey, give me this flexibility for the next 6 months. I'm requesting flexibility to do strikes. And that would almost itself be like a signal to the other country that, hey, I'm operating with full capacity here. But it would I'll give you a year. For a year, the president has authorization to use the military in such a way that he determines is effective with respect to the Middle East situation, and that is authorized for a year. Then I would be like, okay, fine, he has that. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. This check reduces operational and strategic effectiveness to the extent that you haven't pre-authorized that degree of flexibility by Congress, and that's just yes, I'm willing to bite that bullet and it be a trade-off.
Okay. Then the next point is that we are here. Okay. I wish that we had a Congress that acted quickly during the Korean conflict and actually passed an authorization for use of military force. I wish the banana wars and the Indian wars of the 19th century hadn't been launched on flimsy pretexts, and then AUMFs or non-AUMFs were passed after the fact. I wish that Bill Clinton and Obama had gone to Congress for more specific authorizations in reference to military stuff, so we could have set the precedent that the president of the United States can't just do whatever the fuck he wants with flimsy excuses in reference to security. So now that we're here with a post-Patriot Act, Palantir, military-industrial complex, AI, Orwellian deep state on the horizon, and we have Donald Trump not only enabling these things, but pushing these things to the limit, what do we do
why would
now?
You want to give him a war power? That's what I mean. Like, in this situation.
But the War Powers Resolution of 1973 didn't do anything, or at least it wasn't enforced.
Oh, I'm just saying this is the time to reassert. Like, the best time to reassert is now, okay? And that's why I argue for it.
No, for sure. But I'm saying we might even need to check out the text of the War Powers Resolution of 1973. But I think that's part of the articulation that you're saying, that like Trump did not satisfy the War Powers Resolution of 1973, right? Because you're saying that you can do things in exigent circumstances, but this is not an authorization to blanket launch any war you want for 60 days. You have to have these articulable things that are happening in order for us to back you during this thing. So
yes, Trump is violating both the War Powers Resolution and the Constitution. So the Constitution grants to him some implied authority with certain actions to take. So he's in violation of the Constitution because of an ultra-virus act, an act taken without authorization, for failing to be in a situation in which that is there. So he's in violation of that. He's also violating the War Powers Resolution for separate reasons. And so, yeah, the War Powers Resolution is not a grant of authority. The War Powers Resolution is imposing additional procedural checks on the president, in addition to just the Constitution itself. So he's in violation of both. And the best time to reassert that is now. Because why? In the context of Palantir, in the context of a encroaching fascist government who is trying to limit our freedoms and trying to go after the people, why would we want to co-sign the war power? The war power is like one of the most important powers to sovereignty. The war power gives the government emergency authorities, some might say. I think about what Lincoln did there, or at least justification to domestically fuck with liberty, including by drafting you to die in Iran and drafting your fellow country people. So this is a really, really important thing not to just like give away, especially given the considerations that you brought up of like the encroaching surveillance state, et cetera, all the rights deprivation.
Which is going to get worse, by the way. So I think that weirdly enough, we might actually thread the needle between like an Orwellian police state and the fascist dystopia that seems to be rearing its head, and the liberal democratic republic that we all love. I think we might be able to thread the needle on this, but what's concerning to me, especially with the Caribbean conflict, and sorry if it just sounds like I'm agreeing with you, but I probably am,
Yeah.
in reference to the reason why the Caribbean conflict cannot stand without a check from Congress is because you've taken terms that mean something, like terrorism. Like terrorism is defined, I believe, as the effectively like attacking civilians in order to achieve a political result on purpose. And so recategorizing drug trafficking as terrorism and drug traffickers as terrorists. Same thing with Antifa.
Well, some of them are. I just want to be clear. A lot of these narco people, I think it's accurate to call them terrorists with respect to like Mexico, for example, or to respect.
Right, but they're not engaged in active hostilities
there.
and terrorist attacks against the United States.
Right.
They're
Exactly,
engaged in terrorist attacks against their domestic governments, and that should be differentiated.
Yes,
and then,
100%.
And then same thing with reclassifying Antifa as a foreign terrorist org, right? That characterization is terrifying because effectively, if you have like a left-wing person who likes to wear a balaclava when they go to protests, but they actually aren't a violent person, and then they identify as Antifa because they hate fascist organizations, then what kind of like police powers are you unleashing from the state by declaring Antifa a foreign terrorist org? You know, that's the kind of shit that's scary.
That's why it should be like incredibly concerning. And that's why, like, in this situation, I'm more concerned by the assertion of this power than I am about the tariff situation, which is itself another big issue. Right? Like, one of Congress's core authorities is the authority to tax and set tariffs. And to me, that is a really important power that Congress have. But like the power with respect to war, like I'm more worried about a president abusing and stealing the war power than I am about him abusing and stealing the tariff power. That should be just like very intuitive to people for whatever reason. A lot of liberals, I have to say, maybe not all of them, and I will note that the vast majority of Democrats are against this. The vast majority, I would say, so far the polling suggests the vast majority of Republicans are in favor of it. Contrary to a lot of the copers like Cenk Uygur, TYT, are like, we should unite with the right wing populists. They're just going to fall in line behind Trump, etc. Hopefully, they'll change their view, in my opinion. But yeah, like liberals' minds, some liberals, not all, turn off on the war thing, and they're just like, oh, I don't really know. I guess everyone does it. I guess everyone fucks up, whatever. But on the tariff shit, they immediately stand up like, these are illegal tariffs. How can the president do this? It's Congress. It's Congress.
We all have our temperamental blind spots. And
Yes.
I'll agree that liberals do have, because what they, sorry, this isn't meant to be mean to anybody in particular, but they don't want to criticize. I actually think it's a tribal thing where they don't want to criticize
Obama,
Bill Clinton
Clinton.
for the Kosovo
Yeah.
thing. They don't want to criticize Obama for Libya and Syria. They also don't want to, because Korea is part of like the humanitarian interventionist narrative, they don't want to criticize Korea. So they do this like post hoc rationalization of, well, when we abuse war powers for good reasons, it's good. But when we abuse war powers for bad reasons, it's bad. And I still want the ability to abuse war powers limitations when it's good. Therefore, let's not call it out too much. So, I mean, I think it's subconscious,
that
but I
might
do
be
think it happens.
Yeah, that might be on people's minds that like, well, Obama did this, and so I need to wait. And that, I think, was the model that you were proposing. I do want to at some point move to that model of like distinguishing this from previous invocations of this kind of like implied authority. So, and I think that's very interesting to me, and I think that's what you propose to do. And I think that might be on some people's minds. But there's also just like this presumption based in media or based on whatever that the military is Trump's domain, that he can do anything he wants with the military, and that like is a seeming presumption that a lot of people just have into like, oh, what are we gonna do? It's foreign, whatever. But it's just not the case. It's not what the Constitution says. It's similar to like the deployment of the military domestically. We have some views on that, and Congress is able to control that. And Congress has, for example, made it a crime to use the military as a posse comitatus, except for certain exceptions. So yeah, I just think that people's minds need to be calibrated to
Weirdly
consider the
enough,
power.
I checked out when that was passed. It was passed in 1873.
Yes.
So,
No,
unfortunately, it was probably an anti-reconstruction legal
yes, no, it
limit,
was. Yes, no,
but
no, you're absolutely. So
it's
guys,
still
but that was the
good.
purpose of it.
It's still a good
So
principle.
understand what was happening there, and this is why this is why Trump's arguments on it were so bad. That the Posse Comitatus Act was supposed to stop like the Union Army from enforcing civilian law in the South. And you could say, well, it's motivated by like a bad reason because why do we want to end Reconstruction? But it does show that there was a position against the military enforcing civilian law, like for example, immigration is civilian law, right? And that we wouldn't that's the purpose of the law. In other words,
Hold on. This is sorry. This actually cuts to part of the reason why I'm so pissed at Steven right now. Destiny, to be clear, is because he would have said post 1865, and a lot of his chatters would as well. Maybe even some of your chatters. They would have said, "Scorched earth, fuck that. No Posse Comitatus Act, federal Reconstruction, punish all the Confederates. They're not, this, that, the other." And yet, Posse Comitatus, that law passing in 1873, which was passed under, let's say, malevolent or bad motivations, it's still something that allowed us to hold Trump accountable 100 years later, like 150 years later, where when Trump was trying to unilaterally deploy federal forces into the United States, the judges were able to say, only for defense, only around federal buildings, and they're not allowed to enforce civilian laws. And so effectively, what was a limitation on the liberal authoritarianism, if you want to call it that, from 1873 has actually muted fascism in the 2020s or the 2010s and the 2020s, which I think is amazing.
yeah, no, I think that's ironic.
Yeah.
But I don't think that undermines some of the point. I understand what you're saying. Like, but there are other things.
Well, in case you haven't seen it, Steven wants to go full like lib fascist. He wants to do liberal shit, but he wants to do it in a fascist way.
Right, and presumably you're against some of the actions that are being proposed, like political prosecutions or whatever, because you view them as like antithetical to our Constitution and our order of liberty. Like, but I just view that same thing. I think you need to show your consistency with respect to the war power. We'll get there, but I will say there's a
I think that's where we need to get.
Sure. There's a medium here, which is like I don't have to support political prosecutions or getting rid of due process or like having protectual charges. I don't have to support that to say the post Reconstruction era was like too nice to the South. I don't have to support that shit to say we should be hard on the people who commit crimes in the previous administration. And I don't think that it's inconsistent to say, hey, like look at what um abiding by these insurrectionists in the context of Reconstruction, look at how much harm was done by that, but then also like just using some of those laws that were passed in that era
We could
to
have
prevent like a thing here. There's something
we could have done so much more. And by the way, if we had even done more through the legalistic process in the late 19th and early 20th century, we would have saved ourselves a headache right now. So for instance, like with one of Lonerbox's proposals, which I really liked, was codifying, because effectively, correct me if I'm wrong, what happened with the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment in reference to the Colorado case is that the Supreme Court said, yes, this is still on the books, but Colorado doesn't have the ability to enforce it. It's Congress who needs to be able to enforce it. And then they kicked it back to Congress. But Congress itself has not codified how to process the 14th Amendment thing. So realistically, Congress could come up with a process where they say, you have to do it through impeachment, or you have to do it through a majority vote, or you have to do it through a supermajority vote, or arguably, at least I would argue this if I could, I would argue there should be a commission, right? You have a bipartisan commission, of 13 or 12 members, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, and you have to take a majority vote on who qualifies for being an insurrectionist, and therefore they're barred from future office.
Yeah, Congress could directly empower a body to do that. Congress could directly enforce Section 3. People are starting to steal my idea, which is fine. I have no problem with it. You guys run with it. But my idea was to now I think this is a low chance of success for reasons, but to civilly enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and to get Congress to declare that Trump was not validly in office and to declare that his actions pursuant to color of law, at least some subset of them, including his pardons, are null and void and have no effect and are not to be heeded. Like I would say that I'm okay with them pursuing that. That's been my idea. That's what I proposed. But I don't think the Supreme Court will buy it. But I don't have a problem with them doing that. And I've argued that I think now for months that
Yeah,
this is,
so
of course,
yeah,
to see.
the point of that being, the thrust of that being that if they had clarified that in the late 19th, early 20th century and gone through that process, not only would have they have been more harsh to the Confederacy through a legal process, but they would have set precedents for us in the modern era.
They did disallow under Section 3. They just used their authority under Section 3 to undo it. So they did apply Section 3, but then there's also authority in Section 3 to undo it, and so they just did that too. In addition to the pardons, there was like legislative amnesty as well as undoing of the Section 3 stuff, which is specifically allowed under Section 3. You can undo the disqualification.
Well,
I would argue that
Mhm.
we should apply it retroactively to Trump. We should try, right? But if that was Lonerbock's ideas, he got it from a good place. That's what I'm proposing. That's what I think should happen. But all I'm trying to say is like we should be consistent on rule of law and doing things the right way, and that applies to the war too. But if you want to talk more about the specific example,
well, no, let's talk about the war. So I think that you're claiming that you do not buy the argumentation from the Trump administration. You think that they themselves have verbally flubbed and shown their true colors, that this is a regime change war, that this is not a limited anti-nuclear strike, that this is not some kind of defensive pretext to whatever. But my question is, how does Congress, especially with its current makeup, but also after the midterms, how does it hold the administration accountable? Because, so for instance, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, I don't even know. You should probably just tell me. Would it be through the impeachment process, and what does that take? Would it be through legislation? Would it be through like financial appropriations? How would you actually hold these people accountable?
Yeah, so there's what they could do and what they're likely to do. The answer is they're almost certainly not likely to rein in the president to any significant degree. But these are the things they could do, and what I would advocate, depending on the Democratic majority, how much. And to be honest, I think some Democrats secretly and some not so secretly support the action. Just to be clear,
Mhm.
like Fetterman obviously supports it, but I think there's probably more agreement than is being noticed. And I think that some of these performative war resolution votes, like Moskowitz, he hasn't explained why he went from being a no vote to a yes vote. And even though I don't buy the always like the rotating villains theory, I think is played out by a lot of people. Sometimes I think it applies, and I think it applies here. I think and I suspect that there are more Democrats who agree with the action than are making themselves known.
Well, they might
And okay,
be
but
thinking
putting
about
aside,
it from the consequentialist lens, though, where effectively
absolutely they are.
it's
Yes.
it's already been initiated. We've hated the Iranian regime for a long time. Israel was going to do this anyways, in for a penny, in for a pound. And
Yeah,
while
they want to outsource it to. Yeah, they'd rather outsource it to
let the
president. They
Republicans
don't
be the
wanna-
villains.
Yes.
And then
Yeah, 100%.
not just that, but I want to say this because I am as concerned as you are that effectively through noble intent we are going to destabilize Iran and it's going to cause tens of thousands of deaths, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there also
crisis,
is
things like that.
a world that exists where we just keep doing airstrikes over the next couple of months, killing Iran's leadership, and then eventually Iran's leadership, maybe the entire IRGC, maybe the entire security state, maybe the Ayatollahs don't go away. But effectively what happens is one Iranian pops up. What's that?
They become amenable to like Delcy Rodriguez.
Yeah, exactly. One of them just goes like, hey, on the news media, I'm still going to call you the Great Satan. But on the back end, I'm going to normalize trade and security relations with the Gulf states, Israel, and the United States. And that would still be a positive development.
I don't assess. Yeah, I agree that it could be the case at this turn. My hope is that it turns out awesome, and they are more amenable, and they agree not to ever have a nuclear weapon or whatever. I just don't view that as particularly likely. And even if it does happen, I'm going to be consistent in saying that it was wrong for president to do it that way, even if it turns out in hindsight, like you can do something that was stupid in the moment, right? You decide to blindfoldedly like walk into a given place, but for whatever reason, putting on the blindfold made it so that, like you had a good result, or someone like stopped you and gave you $1 million. I don't even fucking know the example I'm bringing up, but you understand what I'm saying. An action could be stupid in retrospect, notwithstanding that it ended out like it turned out well or something. So I don't grant that I don't say it's impossible that we have a good result. I just don't view it as particularly likely right now. Second of all, on the question you asked, which is like, what could Congress do? I've already described that. I don't know that even with a Democratic majority, especially with a bare Democratic majority, that there's going to be much in the way of substantive pushback. What they could do, if the majority were significantly large, or if they wanted to, is either A, impeach the president and people involved. That's almost certainly not going to happen. B, make it
Is that a
illegal
simple
to
majority
engage
or
in
a
this.
super majority?
It's a simple majority in the House to impeach, and it's a 2/3 majority in the Senate to convict.
Okay.
So it's 66 or so senators to convict, and you might need 67. Don't quote me on that, but it's 2/3 to convict in the Senate. So that's not going to happen. But that's one thing that Congress could do. Congress could make it illegal to engage in the war. If you remember Iran-Contra, right? Congress can make a law that a certain intervention is illegal. Now, whether the Supreme Court would uphold that law, I think it would be insane for them not to, given that Congress has the power to declare war. But even putting that aside, Congress has the power of the purse. So the third thing they could do is they could just withdraw any funding related to, make it no, don't appropriate any funding for the specific war effort. And so there are meaningful things that Congress could do. Are they likely to do it? No. But yeah, that's just my response. I do think that this is impeachable and Trump should be removed for it.
Well, okay, but then that gets back into so for instance, I'm okay with you objecting to it, but I think I'm gonna appeal to the fact that like I brought up like a legal decision that I disagree with, where a jury of my peers doesn't follow the due process in order to achieve the result that I want, even if I can assert that legalistically I am correct based off of this facts and evidence. What does that actually have to do with the real world? Because if the procedure is not followed through and if there's no accountability, then in what sense is it illegal? Because correct, like this is where I think it's going to go. The chances of there being a simple majority in the House and a 2/3 in the Senate, I would be, if we had video of Trump raping kids. Yeah, if we had, hold on, I need to finish this. Give me some rant time. Even if we had video of Trump raping kids, the chances of
friendly don't. Hey, can you use TOS friendly terminology? Just because last time I had Chud Logic say the R word, raping.
Yeah.
He, or you just say SAN or something.
Demonetized.
Demonetized. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll stop saying that word. But if we had proof positive that Trump had conducted illicit acts with children, then I think it would be a struggle to get a 2/3 majority in the Senate. We would probably have to fight tooth and nail to impeach Trump, let alone remove him from office. So I would actually
to impeach him, but I think it would be easier to impeach him, but I don't think he would be removed, or it would be difficult. Depends on the nature of the video or whatever, but yeah.
Then prohibiting this as a military function, I think is low. The funding thing,
agreed.
What I think is going to happen,
I think that's also low because the Democrats are going to be like,
we have to support our boys. We have to support our boys in green.
Right, and they've already died, right? And they're still like, oh, the Democrats aren't funding the Defense Department. So that's why I'm suggesting I'm not saying that this is likely to occur. I think it's unlikely to occur.
No, I'm not even fighting you on that. Because what I would say is not only do I agree with your assessment, I'm basically just appealing to the fact that since it's unlikely to occur, of what uses are outrage. Now, the next step though, which people give me flack for, is if let's say that the 26 is actually a slaughterhouse. The Democrats hold on to their They hold on to their political momentum. They dominate in the House. Maybe they have a slim majority in the Senate, although what's more likely is they're going to have like a slim minority in the Senate. But then you can get a couple of Republican defectors, like Rand Paul or Thomas Massey. So let's say we also get a president. So let's say in 28, we maintain the political momentum and we get Gavin Newsom for president. And so we have a Democratic president. We have either a slim majority in the Senate and then we have a substantial majority of Democrats in the House. Then at that point, I think nuking the filibuster, passing all the pardon reforms, and passing all the, I could bring them up. Larry Hutchinson from my chat says it's all his ideas. But effectively, a loaner box had like half a dozen to a dozen reforms that I think are all good for the Republic and the the health of our Republic. I would make as a part of that packet, particularly if Iran devolves and gets worse, I would make effectively repealing the 2001-2002 AUMF or sunsetting it, and then passing a new war powers resolution or authorization stating, like, so for instance, like clarifying that the president can take action in cases of like imminent threat of terrorist attacks or military action by a foreign power, but without the consent of Congress, these actions can only preempt the specific violence that's going to happen. So let's say there's like a VBIED that's about to hit an area.
In other words,
hold on, real quick. I'm almost done, I promise. It can preempt the specific violence that is imminent, and it can be defensive. But besides that, you cannot initiate offensive military operations without the consent of Congress. That's something that I would pass.
So I have no problem. What you're suggesting is like, remove these old laws that are bad faithfully being interpreted, clarify the scope of authority that you want to give to that president, and we might have like reasonable disagreements about like how much it should extend. That's all fine with me, 100%. But I think it also suggests that your position should be, this is probably illegal, even if it's in conformity with past precedent that other presidents, including Democrats, have done. I think that your position should be, this is probably illegal. And we can say, assume it's legal, am I in support of it? And you can take the position that you would be, assuming it were legal. Or you could even say, even if it's illegal, I support it. But I think you have to grant that you think the war is illegal. And if it's not, and if you wouldn't grant that, what would it take for a war to be illegal? I don't even know what would an illegal war look like to Connor under the U.S. Constitution?
No, this is a great question. I'm still playing with this idea in my head because I haven't fully researched it or ingested the concept. Can you give me some latitude to articulate it?
Yeah.
So I had a conversation with Lactoid. Also has a Juris Doctorate. You can think he's an idiot, but he does have a JD and he's a practicing lawyer. And so Lactoid was saying that he read a essay from a legal scholar about Obama's actions in Libya and how they were legal. And so they cited historical precedent. And what it said is that war is a specific thing. It is open hostilities between a nation state and a rival nation state. It is the ultimate level of conflict between two peoples. Whereas acts of war, we do all the time. So for instance, like sanctioning is potentially an act of war. Taking sanctioned ships is potentially an act of war. Defensive military actions are acts of war. And preemptive military actions are acts of war. And yet, the war being in this higher echelon of context, it effectively authorizes Obama to do what he wants to do in Syria and Libya. Because these are not acts of war, this is not a declared war between Libya and the United States, where we are at a state of hostilities between the nation, which is the people, and the state being the government. We are not at war with Libya, but we're supporting rebels so the Libyan government gets overthrown, which is an act of war, but it's not war itself. So, sorry, I could keep yapping, but that's the thrust of the statement.
So I don't agree with that, like sort of that rendition, which seems to suggest that the declaration of war, that's just for the specific declaration. We're just giving Congress the power to declare it, but everything that would entail a war, that stuff is, um, you know, that stuff is all allowed by the president implicitly, and the only thing that the Congress has is the declaration part of it. But that's just
Well,
not what the
I
framers
don't know if
intended.
that's really getting at the spirit of what's being said. So, for instance, like if a war is a state of unlimited hostility, so effectively that would allow us to
I would
like.
call it an armed conflict. I would say war in its most general is armed conflict between
You're
a
probably
sufficiently close
right, but
group.
with war, as you stated as well, it comes a bunch of emergency power. So, like for instance, like the draft and all that kind of crap. So the question is like, if we, let's say this is the perfect example. Let's use Yemen as an example. We are not at war with Yemen. We do not have a declared state of war with Yemen, but Yemen keeps blowing up random ships as they pass there, whatever. So if we do a limited airstrike against the assets that are doing terrorist attacks against commercial vessels passing through the whatever strait that is, the Red Sea, are we in a state of war with Yemen? Yeah, yes or no?
We're making war with Yemen, and so I think the war power encompasses from Congress both um, making war, in other words, taking actions which are actions of war. Now, sometimes you might give the president certain authority to do certain things that would constitute acts of war, and Congress has done that. It has given the president like the ability sometimes to like to do sanctions and shit unilaterally, certain kinds of it, right? So that there are ways in which Congress can pre-authorize certain flexibility from the president. But I think that the war power of Congress encompasses both acts of war and like whatever it is to say that we're in an open state of war. Now, I think that people who claim that Congress's power is more limited to kind of like significantly prolonged conflicts or something like that, they're just like not giving evidence for why we should interpret the war power that way. That isn't, I think, what the framers had in mind. That there's some sort of like arbitrary amount of length or set of hostilities that is encompassed by it. I think it would be making war or declaring a war. And in this case, right, this is the best case because how could this not be war? How could this be anything other than war? In this case, like this is the most war can be.
I wanna press you on this though. This is the most war that war can be. Um, Hold on.
Strikes, okay,
Let me.
decapitation strike, persistent infringements. So there's a literal trespass into their territory with consistent planes, bombing campaigns. Remember what was Pearl Harbor? Pearl Harbor is them bombing our
Oh yeah.
fleet. Right? No one would deny. Right. That states of
Well,
war can be
well, hold
done
on, but I want
exclusively.
to before we
They
get
also
into Iran,
yeah.
I want to show you the test cases because this happened. Thomas Jefferson was a founding father, and he was a president, and he was a pretty libertarian guy. But when he was president, the Barbary pirate conflict kicked off, where Barbary pirates operating in the Mediterranean started seizing United States commercial vessels. And so so Thomas Jefferson deployed naval assets, including warships and Marines, to the Mediterranean first, and then asked Congress for authorization, which they did grant him, to be clear. But he did say, "Hey, start steaming or sailing for the Mediterranean because we got shit to do." And then not just that,
should have gotten Congress approval first.
Well, hold on. But that's what I'm saying is, if you go through 250 years of history, and if you have the 19th century Native American wars, you have the banana wars in the late 19th and early 20th century, you have the Barbary pirate wars, you have the annexation of Texas, you have the early 20th century. Effectively, what you're doing through your interpretation that Congress must give the president authorization for acts of war or war, you're effectively declaring that like 70% of military conflict in American history was illegal.
I don't know that it's that much. I think that the overwhelming precedent is
It
that
might be.
the president does seek authorization from Congress. And I have no problem. So I'm not going to put a number to it percentage, but I have no problem suggesting that if it were the case, the majority of actions were illegal. I have no problem with that. I mean, like that's the case for the First Amendment. That for the majority of our nation's history, up until like the 1960s, we were not being true to the First Amendment. Just like for the majority, as determined by SCOTUS, we were not being true to the Second Amendment. And yeah, I have no problem saying that the laws about sedition with respect to criticism were illegal at the time they were passed, that the laws banning communists from or making it a crime to join the Communist Party, that those laws were illegal and even notwithstanding the fact that we did it for a while. And so I have no problem with that. And the fact that Thomas Jefferson went to Congress eventually suggests that Congress, he knew, right? He knew Congress had a constitutional role to play there. And it wasn't just, it was required for him to do it, right?
Sure.
It was required.
Yeah. I think the precedent has been firmly set. Precedent, Precedent. Precedent has just been firmly set that plenty of presidents leap before they look and then go back and say, hey, Congress, I'm going to do this.
I'm asking if you think that's illegal. And it's not just legal.
I mean, dude, if you say something's illegal, so for instance, like let's use jaywalking as an example. And let's say that there's a downtown. Hold on. I'm going to fill out the metaphor so we can talk about this sensibly. So if you let's say there's a downtown area that is walkable, severely walkable. There's just shops and all this bullshit, right? And then you basically there's civilians crossing back and forth the entire time. There's vehicles and bikes and all that kind of shit going back and forth the entire time. And law enforcement has decided that because of there hasn't been any deaths or there hasn't been any negative consequence, or the negative consequences are such that they don't care. Hold on, I'm almost done, I promise. And then therefore, jaywalking is simply not enforced in this area. You are asking me, hey, Connor, is jaywalking illegal? And the answer is clearly yes, okay? Because it's on the books. It's written right here. Jaywalking, crossing not in a pedestrian walkway is illegal. You can be cited for it, okay? So I agree with you that it's illegal. However, the judges, the cops, the civilians, the commercial businesses operate indefinitely as if jaywalking was not illegal in that part, then I'm going to say, well, functionally in this area, it's not illegal because there's no, number one, the enforcement mechanism is not being used at all. Number two, the chances of the enforcement mechanism being used are so slim that it might as well be legal.
No, I'm happy to grant all that. Yes. You can say, and I wouldn't disagree with the characterization that based on recent precedent, it's functionally not illegal. It's de facto legal for the president to operate, by which I mean, even if it is illegal, it's not being enforced. I mean, I'm happy to grant that, but like, let's just not argue that it's legal, right? Okay, maybe de facto, functionally, it's as though it were legal, and I agree with that. But the whole point of having to add functionally or de facto as a adjective is to demonstrate that it is illegal, right? It's functionally this, right? It's functionally not enforced. And you can say, I don't care to enforce parts of the Constitution that functionally aren't enforced or something like that. And you can take the view that I value less constitutional provisions.
I guess it's just frustrating because a lot of people in this space, because you have a JD, and this isn't your fault or anything, but they give you a lot of deference because you have your JD and because you worked in New York and you're a smart guy and all that kind of stuff. So when you come out and you go hard and you say, this is illegal and Trump could and should be impeached and all that kind of stuff, like, the reason why it's frustrating from an outside view is like, because I feel like you're omitting the fact that the jaywalking analogy applies. That for 250 years, yes, jaywalking is...
well, no, not 250. I track it to Truman.
Okay. But at this, by the way, obviously I don't have time to watch all your content. So for all I know, when you've been asserting illegality, you've been making caveats for that. We've been on a slippery slope for a long time. Yeah, this is where I think it went wrong.
So I've been bringing up a lot of the time the Obama OLC opinion, where we took a look at it even to suggest that, like, look at what he's doing. All he's doing is citing like previous executive actions and previous OLC. So it's like it's like the president patting itself on the back and saying, yes, yes, what we're doing is legal, and then citing more like general propositions by courts, Youngstown, different things that purport to give some executive discretion on some things. And yeah, so like I definitely am noticing this is not just a Trump issue in that respect, but this iteration of it is way more extreme than we've seen in years, and like one of the worst examples of it. And it's like it shows how bad it's getting, right? How bad it's getting. We're now in a situation where there, even in under Obama, right? And under Obama, on the serious stuff, he proposed it to Congress. On Obama, he was like at least giving some token gesture by having the OLC even write these opinions and seeking legal opinions on what's going on. There's at least like, but now we're in the situation where they're constantly lying. They're disgraceful and uh, saying that they're above law, and now they're flouting it and saying it's war. Right? Like the Secretary of Defense, um, this is a great CNN line. Secretary of Defense, who calls himself Secretary of War, says it's a war. Trump has said it's a war multiple times. So it's not like they're pretending it's not a war. They're openly stating it is a war. And it obviously is a war. And so
Sure.
you can make some sort of room for the Libya strikes, whatever. But if anything is a war, this is a war.
I want to make a substantive point, and then I want to get into this is the most war that war can be, because I disagree, but it's not the thrust of the conversation.
It's hyperbolic. I agree that like there's other wars that are more warlike than this, but this is very, very, very much war.
It walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it has feathers, yes. It has a green head, it swims in lakes, it eats bread even though the bread's bad for it. Realistically, you should feed it spinach. It's a duck, right? But hold on. This is what I'm frustrated with, though, not with this conversation, but in general. So the reason why I'm frustrated with the discourse surrounding DGG and Destiny in reference to blackpilling and Fed posting and talking about violating the law routinely in order to achieve a liberal result, a pro-liberal result, is because I think that expends political capital. Okay? I think that you lose moderate and center right-wing support when you talk like that, when you act like that. So for instance, if there was let's say that DGG just Fed posted itself into a frenzy, and then a DGGer like went to an ICE facility and physically attacked violently, I'll say it's sanitized, but let's say that they attacked ICE agents and God forbid killed several ICE agents, I think that would actually burn political capital where Democrats would start to lose political momentum. Okay, so I think the blackpilling and the Fed posting is not happening. And if you and I agree, it sounds like we agree.
It's not good.
Well, no. What we agree on is the structural remedy to the war powers issue is effectively a Democratic victory, not just in 26 and 28, or it's 26 and 28. So we still have like 2 years to go to not fuck up electorally in order to fix this critical flaw in the republic that could destroy us if it's not fixed. And yet,
and many things, including this, yes.
But that's my point. Is the reason why I'm pissed off at all the fucking Fed posting is because it's like, does Fed posting, and for instance, like there was the protest the other day where a jihadist threw a pipe bomb at a Iran war protest, like a pro-Israel protest or something.
That is it, the Jake guy in New York? Yeah. I think
yeah. Yep. So that's going to burn away political momentum. So we need to have a minimum amount of those incidents possible, but it seems like people are working themselves up into a frenzy in order to maximize that.
I just kind of view them as unrelated because like I don't have a basis to believe that the rhetoric that you're hearing is causing these kind of terrorist actions. And I listen, in terms of who I'm more with Hutch with respect to the extent that I can hear a proposal. I'm not even sure what's being proposed. Why I'm sympathetic to people in DGG and Rashad Crenshaw and things like that is because the feeling is something I totally relate to. The feeling is one of this is not sustainable. We can't live and breathe the same air with people who want to destroy the country. Like there needs to be a reckoning. Like all of that stuff is a feeling that I genuinely relate to. and I think is motivated by like oftentimes a love for country of wanting to see accountability and to put the country in a place where it can survive for a long period of time. I actually do think that it's really material to the country that there be accountability and punishment. Like I really do think I agree with that. I just like there are ways in which it's being proposed that I think are like stupid, not likely to work, or like are self defeating or whatever. All that is to say is you don't have to accept the black pilling rhetoric or whatever to sort out your position and be like, hey, I hear this rhetoric. I don't agree with the rhetoric. And we agree on some substance of how the Trump administration is fucking up. And there are ways we can adjust it, like some proposals you said that you talked about, or that loaner box proposal, or the things that you're looking into, right? You can do all that and say, and I do think this war is illegal, even though there would be a way in which it would be done that I would agree with. I think there's nothing inconsistent with holding those views, which is to say, in principle, if this action were conducted in a way that I thought were consistent with the Constitution, I'd be in favor of it, or maybe even I support it, even though it's illegal. If that's your view, I don't know what your view is on that. And I also think that we ought to make some changes structurally. And also, I don't agree with the blackpilling stuff.
That's my position.
I don't think that. Okay.
What you just articulated is my position. I don't agree with the blackpilling. I don't agree with the Fed posting. I do think that from a consequential analysis, if this resulted in emancipated Iranian people and or regional stability and access to these oil markets, then I would be in favor for it. The way in which it was conducted, I think, is wildly unethical, immoral, probably illegal. But then when we get into the illegality, I kind of go back to my jaywalking metaphor, because you and I might not agree on this descriptively.
You're not losing sleep over it in the same way you think of other illegal acts because of the precedent.
No, I am losing sleep over it. I am losing sleep over it because this would be the equivalent, going back to my jaywalking analogy. Let's say that jaywalking was permitted in this area for months and months and months and months and years, but then a drunk driver careens through the area and like almost kills everybody. And then I'm like, hey guys, like we almost just got fucking murdered. Maybe we need to rethink this jaywalking situation. And then
you do care about it. Yeah.
No, I do care about it, but the remedy, the illegality needs to be remedied through a legal means, right?
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, I don't.
But the legal means is reliant on all of the jaywalkers around me being like, yeah, this is, we need to reform jaywalking in this area because we did almost just get murdered by a drunk driver. So we need to start thinking about how to enforce jaywalking.
No, I agree with what you're saying. Like, it requires getting buy-in for sure. And some kinds of rhetoric might not be conducive to get buy-in. I think one thing that is necessary in order to make the changes necessary is to recognize that it is illegal and that something should be done, right? Like, if we don't recognize that it's either unethical, improper, or illegal, I don't think we would ever get a remedy. Like, so yeah, I totally buy that we shouldn't be encouraging people either implicitly or explicitly to like take some sort of lawless action or some kind of like violent action, which is going to hurt the movement or whatever. But I think there needs to be recognition that this is like a bad thing that was done vis-a-vis the law, vis-a-vis procedure. And then eventually we I think we should talk about the actual, the sort of putting aside the legality, what we think about the war, right?
If you want that, like, it's not a concession because effectively it is my position even before this conversation. Yeah. But if you just want me to say solidly yes, then solidly yes. And then I want to make one point before we move into anything else, which is, this is the most war that war can be. I feel like I agree with you. It walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it tucks like a duck. But particularly with people who are not very historically informed, I like to push back on this concept. Because for instance, we had a strategic air campaign in World War II that involved bombing civilian centers. So of course, there was a military target, like a factory or something like that. But basically, if the factory was in the middle of a city, then we just said, well, tough shit, you shouldn't work at the factory and you shouldn't live so close to the factory, whoopsie doopsie. And then we dropped a shitload of conventional bombs.
Dresden, firebombing of Tokyo, Hiroshima,
Tokyo,
Nagasaki. Yeah.
yeah, Tokyo, Dresden, anything like that. And arguably, we carried that forward into Korea, where I think it's estimated between 500,000 and 1.5 million North Korean civilians died as a result of a similar strategic air campaign in the Korean conflict, which once again was a police action that was never formally declared a war and was also never formally authorized by Congress. So Korea actually set a bad precedent, arguably, despite its outcome being the emancipation of the South Korean people. And then, sorry, final point on this, and then we can move to the next thing. But basically,
Yep.
like, if you think about strategic air, or if you think about the way that war was conducted in World War II, effectively is what I'm alluding to. Almost no modern war, Vietnam, War on Terror, anything like that, has the equivalent of the non-concern for civilians that World War II did. Like World War II, effectively, if you're a civilian and you were in the way, fuck you. Whereas in the War on Terror and even in Vietnam, despite a shitload of civilians getting killed, we actually did have rules of engagement, escalations of force, discernment between combatants and non-combatants, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. No, though I will note, and I think you'll grant that the Western Allies were certainly better about civilian casualties than the Japanese or the Soviets or the Nazis and the German and the Wehrmacht.
Better,
So
but also,
better,
for instance,
yes. Significantly
bombs
better,
away.
yeah.
Bombs Away LeMay was a famous,
Sure.
bloody
No doubt.
strategic air campaigner who killed tens of thousands of civilians without losing an ounce of sleep. And then also General MacArthur, considered a hero of World War II.
I think he advocated nuking.
He knew
Korea.
that there were cobalt deposits in the mountains of North Korea, and the Chinese were reinforcing the North Koreans. So he asked the president of the United States if we could get tactical nukes to drop in a line across the North Korean-Chinese border so we could irradiate the cobalt, effectively making an uninhabitable, radiation-filled border between China and North Korea. So yeah, just because I'm just saying, there were some fucking monsters back in the day that to us... They seemed normal. They weren't. They were fucking crazy. They wanted crazy shit.
People need to realize that, the context of total war in the World War II situation, maybe that affects how you think about it. Maybe the fact that a lot of these rules of engagement happened afterwards. But in general, I just view that as like a distinct question, whether or not it's, the issue of civilian casualties, targeting civilians, etc., different than whether something is legal under the U.S. law. And I know that you're not saying it is, but just like I'm just noting that there are different inquiries, whether it's legal under international law, or whether it was proportional from an ethical consideration or perspective. That's
yeah.
very different.
The thrust of the past 5 minutes is just that, like, targeted strikes, a decapitation strike against leadership, and pointed precision strikes against infrastructure is a far cry from strategic air campaigns. Strategic bombing air campaigns, I should say.
Yeah. I mean, like, I agree they're different, but it doesn't mean it's not war.
It's still war. It's still a duck. It swims in a lake. It's got a green head. It eats bread and spinach. It's a duck.
And on the point about the Korean War, and we'll get into this in a second, I think that, again, the issue of whether or not it ends up having good results, that could be true of illegal action too. And for example, I think the Cambodia expansion from Nixon was never authorized by Congress, or there's something there about what Nixon did in expanding the war into a different country. So yeah,
oh yeah, Cambodia and Laos. Cambodia and Laos. I think we started a strategic air campaign in bombing and special forces missions. I don't think we really had any kind of specific operation for Cambodia and Laos during the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and so like these undeclared and unauthorized wars run the gamut in terms of their results and the history of intervention. I'm not principally opposed to all U.S. interventions. I'm not that much of a dove or anything. I just think that the ones that we have here, to the extent that we're doing it, they should be informed by like good intel, a good chance of success, and also authorization. Why don't I go to the bathroom real quick? I'll come back, and then we can talk about the policy as such without respect to the legality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I'll just talk about American war crimes for the past 200 years.
Okay, cool.
So, some people in my chat are citing that they don't think the banana wars and the Indian wars and the what is it, the Barbary pirate wars are analogs, but they don't need to be analogs. Okay, they don't need to be analogs. They all just need to share different variables. So, for instance, my understanding of the Barbary pirate wars is that we had a few commercial ships seized in the Mediterranean, and these were not state actors. They, even though they resided within the Ottoman Empire, they were like independent actors. And so we went to the Ottomans diplomatically and we said, hey, we're having this problem. And they said, hey, well, realistically, like, we'll try to enforce it, but pirates are going to pirate, so you need to handle your own shit. So Thomas Jefferson sent in the Navy and the Marine Corps to defend American commercial assets and just started, slaughtering pirates. And these were citizens of the Ottoman Empire. And so, that's an early intervention that didn't have a declaration of war from Congress. And the authorization that we did have was after the fact, after the troops had already started sailing, after I don't know the exact timeline, but effectively after Thomas Jefferson had already ordered the repositioning of the Navy and the Marines into the Mediterranean. Sorry, I didn't expect you to be so quick. I had just started. That was the first American war crime. I didn't even get into any of the other ones.
Bro. I'm fast. All right.
Good.
Let's get into the war itself as such. So put aside the legality. I'm still against the war. And that has to do with who's running it. And it has to do with what I think is likely to occur with respect to the war's goals. And so that's why I'm against it. Like, if I thought that they had good intentions and that it was likely to achieve the desired result, and I do think it's a desired result to overthrow the Iranian regime. If I thought it was likely, maybe I would be more in support of it. But I think the people who are running it are liars, oftentimes incompetent, don't have the best interests of the Iranian people at heart, and consistently have demonstrated, a disregard for any limitation on their authority and any sort of check to make sure that things are being complied with and disclosure to the public and to Congress. And so, how the war will be conducted, who is running it, and what I think is likely is informing the decision that I think is it's a bad war.
Weirdly enough, the whiplash might be our saving grace. And what I mean by this is Trump himself has attention deficit disorder. I think we can agree on this. And so he doesn't want to talk about Iran forever. He doesn't want to talk about a ground invasion forever. It would be really weird. I understand if the CIA arms like local combatants or arms Kurds in the Northwest. I would understand if that was a part of the thing to try to overthrow the Iranian regime. But the truth is that if the Iranian regime persists and they get a pragmatist who says, yes, I'll still put on a big show, but I'm going to stop attacking Israel. I'm going to stop attacking my Gulf neighbors, and I'll normalize energy trade relations with the United States. It doesn't matter if that's somebody who's overthrowing the government or if that's somebody who is an IRGC stooge. Whoever says that, they get to keep the job. They're the people who doesn't get killed. And so I'm kind of thinking that you probably could airstrike your way into that guy.
I don't know why we think that. It seems like the IRGC is running or at least highly influential on who is going to come to power. The person they've installed as supreme leader is Khamenei's son, and I'm like not. I think the regime is more embedded and has more internal checks and self-sustaining mechanisms than the Chavista regime of Maduro, and for that reason, I think is a lot harder to dislodge. And the fact that they've replaced the supreme leader with his son, whose wife was killed in the attack, whose parents were killed in the attack, I think it shows that the regime is doubling down. Now, maybe it's the case that it could happen that some other person gets in charge. They kill this supreme leader and they keep doing this, right? And then eventually get someone. I just like have no basis to believe that that's particularly likely.
I mean, it could,
And I
but
don't think
at
that
the same time,
I don't think that Trump has. Sorry. Last point. My bad. I
yeah.
know that I interrupted you. I don't think to your point on ADHD. I don't know if Trump has ADHD, but he's certainly whether he does or not, he has like not good patience. He's not a patient person,
No,
and you can already the way he's signaling suggests that like he wanted this to be quick and he wants it to end
he wants to
sooner rather
declare
than
victory and
later.
walk away.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So hold on though. He could still do that while keeping a military option in his back door. And by the way, it might be to his advantage. So, for instance, let's say that, and by the way, these are all stats that are coming off of Twitter. I don't really trust anything from anybody, but I know our capacity for warfare, and so I feel like I can align that stuff. So Iran is capable of sending out shitloads of shaheads, sending out plenty of ballistic missiles, all that kind of stuff. But it does seem very haphazard. For instance, they've attacked like 17 random nations around them, including Azerbaijan. And like for me, it's like the 50 Cent, like, well, what the fuck did I do to you? Like that's kind of the way that I feel is like Iran just lashed out against all of its neighbors. And so for me, if we slow down, if we stop the airstrikes, then at that point, business might resume with the IRGC just being like more paranoid. You know, that's basically what they're gonna do.
Yeah, that's why I'm against. That's one of the reasons why I think I'm against this regime is because like that's now
But
twice.
how long are they gonna
Trump,
keep Khomeini Jr. in an underground bunker?
I don't fucking know. They seem determined not to wait out Trump, so maybe they're willing to wait him out for a couple of years. I don't think that that's totally out of the realm of possibility that they hide him away, and I think that that's like something that we need to contend with. That's like a realistic possibility. But just
But
like
if we,
putting that
this is where we get into power though. So there's this excellent essay by CGP Grey that basically talks about why revolutionaries never really complete the revolution that they want to complete, or it seems
the
like
rules
it's
for rulers thing.
maybe it probably is, but effectively he talks about keys, right? You know, the keys to
Yeah, the
the
keys to power.
economy, the keys
Yes,
to
I'm a
military,
big fan
keys
of
to
CGP
whatever.
Grey.
So the
Yep.
point is what we've done, and everybody should go watch that essay. But what we've done is there's a whole bunch of key holders, people who hold the keys to power within Iran. And what we did is we killed the top level of key holders. And so now there's a scramble for power. And so we don't know who's, it seems like the key holders, there's enough like middle level key holders that probably the regime is going to reorient itself and just become itself again, probably arguably even a radicalized and more militarized version of itself. But the truth is that there also might be opportunities for more pragmatic key holders to seize power. And so that's the thing is like, if we have the capacity to continuously kill key holders, we can just kill until we get what we want.
Yeah, I don't know that that's likely to achieve the result.
It's
In
not a
this
great
context.
strategy, but it's
Ye-
but it's still a strategy.
right, but like I just don't. I'm wondering why we think it's a strategy that's likely to work. There's not really a great ton of historical analogs that will see the total regime change. So now we're just talking about the Delcy Rodriguez substitution of a more amenable figure. This is after, whether intentional or not, almost certainly I would say unintentional, the killing of these children after repeated insults to their country, which has some support. I would agree. Like probably the majority of support is in changing the regime in Iran, almost certainly. But we had massive amounts of death of protesters, the people who were really against the regime, for which America was just kind of idle until now. We had the death of the children in the strikes, and you're attacking the cities, which is probably where more of the anti-regime people live, as opposed to the people who are more rural, who are more who remember the Shah, for example. And so I just have no reason to think this won't have the opposite effect. I mean, you could tell just as much of a plausible story that this kind of encroachment reminds people of interventions with Mossadegh. It reminds people of the Shah's overreaches. It reminds people of the Iran-Iraq war, and will have the opposite effect of entrenching the regime or creating like a failed state or something. which I
Well,
can't
right, but
imagine
then, but if we look at these things on a long enough timeline, this is where it is kind of interesting using the Middle East and North Africa. Bear in mind, I probably share a majority of the popular sentiment in reference to the Middle East and North Africa that what we did is we took a bunch of authoritarian pseudo-stable nations, we decapitated their leaders, and then those countries devolved into fractious civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. And then now, just now, a decade later, it seems like everybody is so tired that the beginnings of governance are starting to emerge. And what I mean by that is, like, so for instance, with Syria, there's still massacres happening in Syria right now, but it does seem like there's a new Western-friendly leader. And then same thing.
Yeah, but bro, like, think about how insane it is. And I heard this from Richard Hanania, where he's like, he didn't use these specific words, but essentially, let's follow the Syria model. Like, Syria is one of the biggest fucking disasters ever.
Disasters for
in the
who?
Middle East. It's one of the biggest disasters. And put that aside, the conditions
You're thinking with
totally
you're thinking
right?
with your liberal humanitarian brain, where you care about every single human being.
Hello, you cut out. So I had just said something about Syria.
Penis.
Restart everything you just said.